Alright, so the next one I want to show you is DLL Proxying, which is a technique I heard about, but it took me quite a while to combine several online tutorials to get a version of it working. And the way I got it working, I needed Visual Studio 2019. You could probably do it with the earlier versions of Visual Studio included with the Flare VM, but I had enough trouble that the best thing I could do was just use this one version, because as you'll see, you have to make a lot of really strange little adjustments to make this work. So first, I made a working directory, which is fine. And now I want to copy this BG info into my working directory. So I'm going to use a different working directory than in the instructions here to avoid hitting files I created when I was practicing this. So I'm going to go here. I think I want an administrator command prompt. I'm not really sure if I need it, but it won't do any harm. Okay, and then I want to go to users, i.e. user, and I'm working in downloads and malware. All right, and so now I want to copy that file into here. Now this BG info is just a utility that prints some system information in the background. It's just a sysinternals utility. As far as I'm concerned, it's just an arbitrary executable that might have a vulnerability. And as we're going to see, it does. So let's run process monitor again. Procmon. And as always, the trick in Procmon is to get the right filters. So here's the filters. And now I want to have a path ending with version.dil and bginfo. So the process name, let's remove that one and make the process name bginfo. And then set this dil, remove that one, and make it version.dil. All right. All right, if I've done it right, it's going to be sniffing. And now I run bginfo, the one I copied into this folder. Whoops, bg, all right. So there I run it, and here I get some information. Okay, it runs this thing, and I'll stop it, and let's see what it did. It looked in my malware directory for version.dil. See, this is a more subtle mistake. Instead of specifying the full path to this system library, it just gave the name, and then the system hunted for it, and the first thing it did was look in the same folder as where I put bginfo. And then when it didn't find it, it went and looked in system32. So this lets me have a companion Trojan vulnerability. And I see my, let me bring this down a little for the video, because I see my head is covering it a little bit. So here it is, trying to load out of the malware directory and have name not found, and then it looks elsewhere. So now if I just put a file named version.dil in the same folder as the malware, it will load that instead. So that looks pretty good. So let's try doing that. So we'll use Metasploit to make a piece of malware here again. And I just changed the port to 44 or 45, so if you have the other one running from the previous project, you can tell the difference. So I run that, and that will make a malicious dil named version.dil right in this directory. So when that's done, I'm just going to restart it and run bginfo again. So let's go to process monitor, clear the old stuff, and I'll wait until this is ready. In fact, I'm going to shrink it up so we can see them both at the same time. That should work. Good. All right. Shouldn't take long. wonder if Defender is giving me trouble. I must make sure Defender is turned off. I think I excluded this directory, but it's probably good to make sure that it is turned off too. Settings. Yep, let's turn that off. That's not any good. I think that'll catch me there. Okay, it's off, and it's also got exclusions. That's more likely to get it out of my way. And so I'm going to try running this again because I'm suspecting that Defender got in the way. Oh, looks like it stopped just before I hit. Okay, I guess it worked. Let's try dir. Well, there is something called version.dil there. And this one was 5120, but I noticed that it was now 8150 because it must be a later version of Metasploit or something. I loaded the latest version. So I'm pretty sure it's all right. In fact, here's the shell bind I made earlier, and it's the same as that, so I guess it worked. All right, so now I can run bginfo. I'm going to start sniffing events and run bginfo. Okay, and there it goes, and notice it crashed. Now I'm going to stop this, and let's try to analyze what happened here. It looked in the malware and found it, and then it loaded it, but then it crashed. So what happened here is, when it loads a library, the first thing it runs in library is there's a function inside the library that prepares the DIL for use. And the name escapes me at the moment, but that's where all Metasploit does. When Metasploit makes a malicious DIL, all it has is the malware in the first routine that loads to prepare the DIL. There are no actual functions exported to run in the DIL. So a normal piece of code that loads a DIL will not be fooled by this. It will load the DIL, then it will try to connect to the functions in the DIL, and when the functions aren't there, it will crash with an error message, which is what happened here. Now that previous MSDTC thing was so vulnerable that it would load a library and then not actually use it at all. So it would fall for something as dumb as a Metasploit created DIL. But this program is not that stupid. It's loading this version, and then it's trying to use functions in the version, and when the functions aren't there, it crashes. And therefore, it didn't really load the DIL, and I can tell because if I do netstat -an pipe more, it is not listening on 4455, or 4445, which is what it would be. So the DIL did not run. I got busted. This program is not vulnerable enough to fall for that stupid a DIL. What you have to do is make a DLL proxy. And there is a tool here called DLL Export Viewer you can download, which is bloody awesome, which helps us do that. So let's, I think I'm not going to need this anymore. All right, and so let me run that program, which I downloaded, and I think I just put it in my downloads folder. I think I have to go there. DLL Export Viewer. Yep, there it is, and I unzipped it, and there it is, DLL Export Viewer. So if I run this, it will now let me load functions from a DIL, and I chose C Windows System 32 version.dil. That is the genuine version.dil that is trying to load. So if I run that one, it's going to show me all the functions exported by that DIL, and there's only 17 of them, so this is pretty nice. And so I need to get these into a certain format to put in code, and you can do that with view HTML report all functions. Okay, and that opens this thing, and the important thing is it's created a file in C users, IE users, download DILX64 report.html that contains all these function names, which is all I really need. And somebody online wrote a program called parser.py, which will just parse that to pick out the part you need. So I downloaded that. You can save it in Notepad, and we have Python on this machine. And so I can run this thing. I guess I got to make it, since I'm working in a different directory, I might as well do it because it really is pretty easy. So I copy this code, and I put it in parser.py. So let's go here, and Notepad.py. So I make a file containing that code, and I save it, close Notepad, and now I run it. And first I'm going to have to copy it into this folder where I'm working. So I'm just going to take this part of it and copy it into the current folder, into here. Okay, now if I do a directory, that report is here. Now I can do this parser.py thing, which will read the report and write the process data into something called pragma.txt. Okay. And now I can notepad pragma. And this is what it does. It creates these pragma lines, which are something in C++. I don't really understand it. But what this does is this is going to link it to a different file called version orig and get it out of there. So this is just a way of forwarding function calls in a library to another library, which is what I'm going to do here. So now I make a dillmain.cpp, which is going to include some of this code. So I'm going to make a new file called dillmain. And now that contains this code here, which I got from some online tutorial. Made some small modifications in it. Okay, and this code here has a gap here to insert the pragma stuff. So I copy that, Control A, Control C, and I put that in here, Control V. There, this is the dill main of my malicious dill. And so what this is going to do, this is going to be my dill proxy. It's going to forward all the real functions to the real library, and it's also going to have malware in it. And here's the malware. Here's this function called exploit. Now dill main, that's the thing I couldn't remember before. When you load a dill, it runs the function called dill main to prepare the dill for use. And the Metasploit puts an exploit in dill main, malware in dill main. Here I'm going to put my own malware in dill main, and that's going to be this here. It's doing all the normal stuff that a dill main should do, and then it's also running this code called exploit. And here's what exploit does. It just runs a command line and executes payload.bat. So anything in a file called payload.bat will run. So that's all this exploit does. But the point is, this is the Trojan code. It will now do this extra thing in payload.bat and then load a dill that forwards all the functions to the real dill, so it's more likely to fool a vulnerable program. So I save this, and now I just have to make it in Visual Studio, which I'll go through because it took me a long time to figure this out, and it's not very obvious at all. So you click Start and go to Visual. You have to install Visual Studio, which is a big download, but it's not a complicated process, and it's in the previous project. They're using the free community version from Microsoft. And so when you're here, now you have to create a new project here. It's very easy to get lost in Visual Studio. And now, C++ Windows Library, that's what it remembers what you last did. C++ is the language, Windows is the type of operating system, and library code is what I'm making. So when you do that, you'll have some choices here. And what we want is to make a dill. So I go next, and we're going to call this project version and create. Hopefully it's going to complain. A project already exists. So CI user source repos version. Let me see if I can just delete that one. CI user. I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to find out. Desktop. All right. I don't know how to get into my profile in this stupid modern versions of Windows. Users, IE user, and was it in Documents? I think it might have been in Documents. Yeah, Visual Studio, Repos, I think. Is it Templates? Project Templates? Oh, I'm already completely lost. Okay, let me go back to Visual Studio and see if I can figure out where it was. I tried to make it. Okay, CIE user source repos. Okay. Let's see if I can find that stuff to delete it. CI user source repos. CIE user. Wait. C users IE user source. Okay. IE user. I'm not seeing source. What's going on here? C, IE user, source, repos. Is the folder hidden or something? Oh, there it is. Okay, source, repos. There we go. So I'm going to try and delete this thing. Hopefully it's not going to give me any grief. Let's see, delete. Okay, it didn't complain. Good. Now maybe IE user or this thing will quit complaining. Create version. There we go. Good. It's not hidden. It was just hard to find. That's good. And it's good to go through that because you might have the same problem if you follow up the first one. Yes, Visual Studio is a nightmare. That's the thing. That's why I use exactly this version, and it took me a long time because Visual Studio, like any of Microsoft's big products, has got just tons of menus and adjustments everywhere until it can get really hard to see what you're doing. All right, and I'm going to move my face off the screen here so we can see all the little things in Visual Studio. Actually, I can probably put it down here. It'll be all right. All right, so now we have DIL main. This is a base DIL main, and this part should look familiar. So all I have to do is replace all this code by the code we made here in Notepad. So I go here, Control A, Control C. Then I go here, Control A, and delete, and Control V. So now that's the code that goes in DIL main. Now I just have to compile it, which is a lot harder than you might think it would be. This is the part that took me a long time of wandering through tutorials. So you have to, up here, have release 64. So release, and then 64-bit code. And then there are several other adjustments you have to make that are very far from obvious. You have to go over here, right-click version, and go to properties. And then there are several adjustments for how it's going to compile here. Okay, and this is the part where I really had to have exactly this version of Visual Studio. So I need to get all configurations and all platforms up here. All configurations and all platforms. It's something else at first, and it remembers that I changed it before. Otherwise, this drove me nuts for a while. You'll change it here, but when you compile, it won't take effect because it's only affecting like the debug compilation or something. Then I have to go code generation, multi-threaded, and a C++ container, code generation, and its runtime library, multi-threaded. And I must say, I have no idea what this means. I just found it in a tutorial. You'd have to be a much better software developer than me to really know exactly what we're doing there. Okay, so apply that, and then precompiled headers. And typically in a Microsoft window like this, you have to apply before you go to any other tab. I'm not sure if that's true here, but I think it is. So precompiled headers, so that's another thing that could drive you nuts. You can make a bunch of changes, click OK, and they might not all take effect. So this precompiled header, man, I think I spent days on this. It kept looking for this PCH thing, and I finally found out how to get it to quit doing that. You say not using precompiled headers. Because whatever those things are, they're not easy to find. They're not included in this version of Visual Studio or something. So you have to tell it not to use those precompiled header things. Okay, and I guess that's it. Thought there was another one. We'll find out. Now I build the solution. Right-click version and build. And now down at the bottom, we'll see if it works. Build started. It should say success if everything is good. It made a build one succeeded. It's good. And it tells you where it is. C, user, source, repo, version, all that jazz. It made this thing called version.dil, which is our malicious DIL. So now we're in business. We are now done, thank God, with Visual Studio. I'm going to close that. All right. And I don't need those exported functions, and I don't need this DIL source code anymore. I don't need any of that, and I don't need any of that. Okay, now I can just need, so all I have to do is get rid of the old version. I need to copy the original version from the system folder into my working folder with the name version orig, because that's where I'm going to forward all the calls to, and I need to copy that version DIL into the working folder. So I'm going to first delete the, right here is in my folder. I'm going to do dir. Okay, this version.dil is the thing created by Metasploit. And that thing is not working, so I'm just going to throw it away. Okay, now I want to take the system dil and put it in this folder called version orig.dil. So that should be here, version orig.dil. That's the genuine good dil, and this is the dil we just created in Visual Studio, which is malware. So I'm going to put that here. Didn't copy on me again. It tends to happen. The copy and paste into a virtual machine is always pretty flaky. And that goes here. Okay, now if I do a dir, I've got the original version.dil 30 megs, 30K. My proxy is for some reason bigger, 118K, but I don't care. So, and here and it's not the one from Metasploit, it's the one I made. So that should do it. And now I should be able to see it run. So let's start procmon again. And procmon should remember the previous filters. Version.dil and bginfo, that's what I want. I start sniffing and I run. Oh, let me delete this file here, which I created earlier. It's going to create that file on the desktop. So I now run bginfo. Okay, it runs, and didn't see anything. Oh, I forgot to sniff here, but it should have created a file on the desktop called pwned, and it appears not to have, so that's rude. It appears that I fouled it up somehow. All right, well, let's try running it again. If I turn this on and run bginfo, okay, there it did. It loaded this thing. It loaded my malicious version.dil. Oh, I know why. It ran my malware, but my malware runs something that's in a file here, and I forgot to create that file. The malicious activity went into this batch file, and I must have skipped over that part back here. .bat, payload.bat. I need to make that payload.bat file. There we are. I forgot to do this. This is the payload.bat file, so it's running and doing malicious things, but I forgot to turn on the malware. So it's running an empty file. That's a pretty reasonable thing to do wrong. So, notepad, payload.bat. Okay, and what I did here was just echo to create a file that will say pwned.txt on the desktop, just so I can tell it's working. I could also be launching calculator or pretty much anything, just so I can tell it's working. So I save this. All right, and now when you run bginfo, it writes that file. So that proves it's working. It's executing malicious code of my choice, and it's now fooling this utility into loading my malicious dils. So that's pretty awesome, and I was very happy to get it working. So that's the point of this one. And by the way, this one is not terribly malicious, so I don't have to bother cleaning it up or anything. All it would do is write that file, and it only works if I run this program in that folder. It's not automatically starting Windows service like the last one, so it doesn't mess up your machine as much. All right. So I'm going to stop that one.